Another day in the shop with the CB750. Welcome to Hack a Week. Last week we left off with putting the pistons into the cylinders. I pulled that one back out because I have to do a few more things here that I want to show you before we go ahead and put all this up into the case and bolt the connecting rods to the crankshaft. Let's get started with this O-ring. There's an O-ring that goes at the base of all of these cylinders and it has to sit down in this little groove. It can be a real pain in the butt to kind of get in there without having it mess up on you and wrinkle up. I take a little bit of this Marvel Mystery Oil, just a nice light 10 weight oil, and put just a little bit all the way around on the ring. What that's going to do for me is let that ring be able to slip and slide a little easier. I'll move it up and down a few times just to get the oil dispersed. Now just take a small flat blade screwdriver and start to roll it down a little at a time. Hold it with my finger as I go around and just get it started down towards that base. And as it gets down there, it'll start to want to creep into that little groove a little bit. So now what we'll do is just follow up like this with the screwdriver and come back this way a little so that we don't get that little lip, little lump that builds up. It'll stick out. And if you keep working at it, you can get it to slip in there all the way around. It takes a little time and patience. So we've got to do that to all four cylinders. Then I can load up the pistons into all four of them and we'll move on. Once those O-rings are installed, I'm going to wipe away any excess oil just to keep it off from the gasket when we put that together. We can drop the gasket into place. Okay, let's talk rods. I'm putting in these stock, no, they're not stock. Let's talk rods. I'm putting in these forged aluminum connecting rods. Now, there's been a few people that have told me probably not a good idea on a street bike because they stretch. I did a little research on the internet, went digging around for some definitive information on whether or not they do stretch, and the jury's kind of out. I mean, there's a lot of people that say yes, a lot of people say no. It seems to be leading toward yes, they do stretch a little bit. Of course, they'll elongate a little bit when they get hot in the engine, and the worry is that you may strike something on top of the piston with the valve clearances, etc. I'm a little up in the air on what to do here. I'm pretty committed on these. I got the bearings. They're all ready to bolt in. I did find bolts, by the way, for the later CB750F 78, 77, 78. Those bolts will work on the early K models, and they are available again from Honda. They were back ordered for quite some time, but they're available again. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and put these together just like this. And I'm going to take some measurements when the engine's together before it runs, see if I can get a measurement of how far up in the cylinder the piston comes at top dead center with a dial gauge, jig something up on top of the engine so I've got a baseline. And then I'm going to just drive it. I'm going to put 500, 1,000 miles on it, and I'm going to measure that again and see if we actually see any stretch going on in this. And if over a year of driving this thing I do see a little bit of that, well, then maybe I'll tear it back down and do some upgrades. Maybe I'll do a big bore kit at that time. I don't know. But I'm really curious. I'd like to get some hard data on whether or not they do stretch. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and put these in. Even though a couple people on the CafeRacer.net forum said don't do it. Well, you guys, I mean, I really like your advice, but I'm really curious to get some data, and that's why I'm going to do it. And I'm willing to tear the engine back apart if it does seem like they're starting to stretch. So after all that long-winded talk, let's get the rest of these in there, just like I showed you last week with the piston ring compressor, and then we'll load this up onto the crankshaft. pistons installed. So the plan is to get this up onto here, shoved onto the studs, get the rods lined up where they go through the holes here in the top part of the case, and then connect everything up to the crankshaft. There's a couple of O-rings that go on here on these two studs toward the intake side on the center studs, because there's an oil gallery that pumps oil up to the top end for top end lube. Now these bolts here for the rods are just loose. They can move in and out. I'm going to put a little bit of synthetic grease on these just to help hold them in place. And it's really stringy. And just a little bit of that on there, like that. And I push it up. It'll just keep that from falling back and potentially falling out while I'm trying to do this whole thing. Now before this gets up in there, of course, a little bit of assembly lube. The whole idea of which is to give everything that is going to rotate on a bearing surface a little bit of pre-lubrication before the oil pressure gets up when you first crank over the engine, or as you're just turning it over during assembly. This will give you just a little bit of something for lubrication. Just smear that around on the bearings. Try to keep it away from the surfaces where the rod cap goes on. You pretty much don't want anything in that gap when you torque it down. Now right here and right here are where those O-rings go. And I'm just going to set those on there like that for now, and then they'll line up with these other two studs. And there is a recess in the top portion of the crankcase where those O-rings sit. We're ready to get this thing up on there now. I've cut a couple pieces of PEX pipe. This is just the stuff that you use on, plumbing. It's just a plastic pipe. I got a piece about 65 millimeters long and another piece about 35 millimeters long. And what that's going to do is go up on one of these studs and hold the cylinders in place once I get them up there. The shorter one will hold them in place and allow me to move the cylinder up and down a little to get the connecting rods lined up. All right, here we go. This is going to be a little tricky. Chain's got to fall through there. And I got to really be careful that I don't scratch up anything on the crankshaft. All right, here we go. Let's try lifting this up and see if we can get things to work out. I'm gonna try to get one hand underneath here. There we go. I got the chain in. And come back a little bit. Watch my O-rings. Okay, we're on the studs. Now I gotta flip these guys toward me. Wow, this is gonna be tricky. Looks like what I can do is pull back one of the bolts and push it back up. And my tensioner fell out. I'm going to show you every bit of this process without any cuts, because I want you to see just how much work it's going to be to pull this off. Alright, the tensioner's back in place. Get this other one up here. Okay. Whew. Let's go up a little more. Now I'm bumping into the case a little bit on that side. Okay, we're up in the case. And got enough here now I can get a nut in place. I'm going to put one on one of the studs. Okay. Wow. All right, we got to get that tensioner back into the case again. Whether you do it this way or the other way, I don't think there's any real easy way to assemble this whole thing. It's pretty tricky. It's a lot of things that have to go together just right all at once. All right, Let's see. I think what I'll do now is rotate the crank around where these two cylinders right here are now at top dead center. So I can, I'll be able to push everything up, and those will go up onto the crankshaft, and then these two will have plenty of clearance because these are at bottom dead center. Push the bolts back up through again. My grease worked a little bit, but not 100%. Okay, let's give this a push upwards. And what are we hitting on? I think we're bumping against something here. Alright, we'll get it straightened out. Okay, running into a little strangeness there. Spin that nut on a little further and then get up here and take a look at what's happening. I'm bumping up against something here. Oh, okay, it's because the rod is actually twisted a little like that. It's got to be perfectly parallel with everything. So what I got to do is push up and wiggle that rod just a little bit as I go. Yeah, that one's twisted quite a bit. Okay, there we go. Now let's go ahead and see if we can get a different spacer on there. It looks like I've got to rotate the crank a little to go up further. So there we go. Can I get this on there now? Not quite. Where else are we hitting anything there? That rod's free. That one's okay. That one's alright. Tensioner's still okay. I've got to watch the chain guide too as I get up closer to everything here. Alright, I'm going to push it up a little more. I'm still bumping into something, but I'm not sure what. Oh, there it is. The chain tensioner. Okay. Now I can probably get this guy on there, along with a washer and a nut. I get to relax for a minute. Okay. And once again, the tensioner has fallen out. A little bit of grease down in there, like I did on the connecting rod bolts, would probably be a good call. Woo! All right, let's see. So I think what I'm going to do next is go ahead and rotate the crankshaft around till these two rods are fully up against the crankshaft. And let me show you a view from up on top now. This is one of the rods that we have up against the crankshaft. Now remember, the rod ends match up to each one of the rods, and I lined them up over here ahead of time. They've got a number stamped on the side. Where is it on this one? It's over on my end, and this one says 824, and the one down in there says the same thing. So I'm going to get a little bit of assembly lube on this piece, just like before. We'll smear that around just a little bit. Now I'm going to drop that down on there. Now the tricky part about this is going to be to get the bolt to come up through. I can't reach down in there. bolt wants to slide down on me all the time. So I'll take a little hook tool here and just reach down in and see if I can pull it up. There it is. Now when we put these on, it's time to put on the little locking tab that goes on there. And that will get bent and it will keep that nut in place. And while I thread this on, I'm going to get my hook tool down there again and just make sure that the bolt doesn't go anywhere. I'm not going to torque these yet. All I'm going to do is just get the nut on and spin it down a little bit here. I'm going to put just a little bit of oil behind that nut so that when I torque it I get a nice true torque spec and I'm not overcoming friction. I will get this nut pulled up, or this bolt I mean. Get the locking tab on. Go ahead and put a little oil on that one ahead of time. We'll spin the nut on. These nuts have a little flange on one side. It's a little raised flange. Make sure that's towards the connecting rod. We'll spin that one on. So you get the gist of it. That's pretty much what I'm going to do with all 4 cylinders at this point. We'll just bring those up snug. And that's good enough for now. I'll move on to the one that's over that way and get the rest of them. And then the next step will be to torque them all to 15 foot-pounds. Got the center 2 bolted up, not torqued yet, just bolted up there. So now we need to get the outer ones in there. So let's get the rods as parallel as I can ahead of time. Just gonna look down in here and get them lined up the best I can. Okay, now we're gonna push this up a little more. And the crank is gonna rotate because we've got the other ones in place. Let's see if we can just keep going. And now we got the cylinders going into the case, so I'm bumping into that just a little bit. And now I think I can maybe get the next one on there. Yep, just barely. Get my other piece of pipe on there to hold everything right there. And now I can go up here and get the end caps on these rods. Now one of the reasons I put this on here is now I can rotate the crankshaft around and I can get at these 2 rod end cap bolts a little bit easier. Now that I've got that all bolted up, I can go ahead and push this cylinder up just a little bit more. Actually, I think I'm going to have to smack it a little with a dead blow because now I'm going against the resistance of the piston rings. Go ahead and get a washer along with a nut on this. Let's do it right here on one of the center ones. Get a washer on there and a nut. Okay. Now here's a critical spot where the chain guide has to go into 2 little slots that are on this part of the crankcase, the top part of the crankcase. So I'm just gonna keep working my way up a little bit at a time and make sure that's all good. I'm gonna stop right there for now and just snug this up to hold it all in place. I can take this one back off. there are a couple O-rings, like I said, on the back, and I want to make sure those line up properly. I don't want them to be pinched in any way, so that's good enough. That's going to stay right there. That's all we need to do with the cylinder for now. Now I can get up here and torque the rod bolts, and what I'll do is just rotate this around where they're all about the same level, and we'll go ahead and torque those up next. One little thing to note here, some of you might be looking at this chain rail and it sticks out quite a ways. That's because it's from a 77 CB750, not a 73, 77, 76 maybe, 78. But anyway, later on they put a longer portion poking out of the head here to help guide the chain a little better. The early ones stopped right about here. They were pretty short. We're ready to torque everything up now, so I'm going to just take everything a little bit snug with a ratchet first, make sure they're all just snug. Okay, now we'll switch over to the torque wrench, and we are at 15 foot-pounds, and we're going to go a little bit on one and a little bit on the other until we get it to go click, and then we know we're at 15 foot-pounds. There's one. Just go nice and easy. There's 15. There's 15. Let's do the next one. A little bit at a time on each one. Never do one fully without going over to the other a little bit first. In other words, if they're both really loose, don't just torque one up to 15 foot-pounds and then go over and torque this one up. You want them to tighten down nice and even. Okay, they're all torqued. Now we're going to bend up these locking tabs to make sure the nuts don't go anywhere. So these are just sheet metal tabs, so I'll just take a pair of channel locks and hook it onto the bolt, hook it onto the tab, and just bend like that. And then I can take it and bend it around the corner like that, and we'll bend this one like that, and that's about it. If you can avoid using a punch and a hammer, that's ideal. It's not the best idea to go hammering on this, because what you're doing is you're slamming the bearing up against the crankshaft. I mean, if you have to do that, some applications you actually stake on the nut, you put a punch mark right there, and you know, that's fine, I guess, if you have to do it. If you can avoid it, then avoid it. That's my point. Here's another close-up view. You get the idea. See how the piece of sheet metal is conformed to the shape of the nut, so it can't go anywhere. So all we need to do now is do that to the rest of these, and that wraps up the connecting rod piston and cylinder installation. Now that all these are tightened up and the locking tabs are bent into place, let's give everything a rotation a couple of times around and look for any potential places where things might be bumping into things or be really close to anything. Everything looks pretty good. I don't see any places where anything's close to hitting anything. It's always a good idea to just give it a look with your eyeballs. I think we're good. All right, that's awesome. We've got the cylinder pistons and connecting rods in place, and we're ready to flip this thing over after we get the bottom half of the crankcase on. I'm going to do that in the next video, but first I've got to order a few more parts. I'm missing an O-ring right here on the oil gallery. Can't find it anywhere in any of the boxes. I want to look everything over and make sure I've got all the parts I need to put this bottom half on. Kind of do just a dry fit, make sure I got all the bolts, everything, and then we'll put all that together with the Honda Bond on the metal surfaces, and then we can take this off from this jig, flip it all over, and we can start working on putting the head on, getting the chain in place, all that stuff. There's a few more parts I've got to order for that as well. Just little things like O-rings and oil passage orifices, metering orifices, things like that. We'll get it all worked out with the help of a couple of websites so I can spec out the bolt lengths as shown in some previous videos. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the donations. Till next time. Marvel Mystery Oil, good stuff. It's a mystery what it is. I wonder if it'll work for as a laxative.